Alrighty, so here now this section will cover slightly different variation. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, f5, knight c3, black still takes on e4, knight takes e4, and now instead of d5, black plays knight f6. So what is good about this line? First of all, usually it is a big surprise for the opponent because everybody expects you to play d5 here. Secondly, actually in all lines black gets enough compensation, and if white doesn't play very precise, then black can even come to small advantage. So I'll show you how all this can happen. So first of all, in this position, white has three moves. He can take on c6, he can take on f6, and he can play queen e2. So let's go move by move. Bishop takes c6. So here, black surprisingly takes with the pawn from d7. The idea in this position for black is to get space in the center. Yes, the pawn e5 seems weak. However, black will have certain kind of compensation for it, as you will see shortly. Knight f6 in this position may be countered by even playing g takes f6, because now the bishop c8 is open, and black can play bishop g4 pretty quickly. On another side, also queen f6 works, because this brings us to another line, as we will see later. So, the logical move here is queen e2, protecting the knight, planning to play d4 probably, or taking on f6 and then d4. So, black is more or less forced to play bishop g4. h3, bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, black takes on e4, queen takes e4, and black plays queen d5. This is the idea of the whole variation. Otherwise, white would simply play against weak pawn on e5. Now, taking on d5 is of course bad, because after c takes d5, it's only black who can be better, because of strong center. Which means that the move d3 is practically forced. Black plays bishop c5, and his idea is to play on the f file after all, to make short castle, and if needed, to double rooks on the f file. So white has to castle short too. Moves like bishop e3 do not work because of queen takes e4, d takes e4, bishop takes e3, and king e7. This is simply draw. No way white or black can win here. So short castle, short castle. Now there are two possibilities. White can play bishop d2, but then he gets in small troubles after queen takes e4, d takes e4, and rook d8. So now after bishop c3, for example, black can play bishop d4. If white takes, black can take with both rook or pawn and create certain counterplay. So, this means that instead of bishop d2, white has to play another move, and what else can he do? What makes sense here? Probably queen e2 looks most natural, because now white wants to play bishop e3. So it is important to relieve the pressure against pawn f2. Otherwise, by playing rook f7, rook f8, black would probably simply win this pawn. So queen e2 with idea bishop e3. But black plays rook e8, preparing to play e4. And it turns out that white has nothing better than to play bishop e3. e4, bishop takes c5, e takes d3, queen takes d3, queen takes c5. This is the position we get, and well, yeah, the pawn structure of white is slightly better because he has 3 pawns on the king side against 2 of black, but overall this endgame looks very drawish, and I don't think that white has real chances to play for win. Note that after queen b3, king h8, queen takes b7, this is simply bad because of rook e2. And it's rather black who plays for win than white. So this is a good news because that means that taking on c6 and playing against the pawn e5 is not as strong as it looks. Okay, so another alternative is to play queen e2. Now, usually black plays d5. There is an interesting alternative. Black can play queen e7, short castle, and d5 now. But then white can go to g3, and now the queen on e7 looks strange. At some point white probably will play d4 or c4. In addition, pawn e5 hangs as of now. Bishop takes c6 is a threat. So I don't think this is so good. That's why we play d5. Here knight takes f6. Instead of knight takes f6, knight g3. In this position, black can simply play e4. And after d3, here queen e7 works. Because here the knight hangs already. So d3 is not such a good move. And after knight d4, of course, simply bishop d7. In both cases, black is fine. So white should take on f6. G takes f6. And now if white doesn't do anything right away, then black will simply play bishop g7, short castle, and he will have 2 very strong pawns in the center, which means that white has to play d4. Surprisingly, black doesn't play e4, but plays bishop g7, and the problem with the move e4 is that white can play knight h4. Bishop e6, short castle, queen d7, and f3. Long castle, f takes e4, d takes e4, c3. And I think that after all, the position of white is better. He controls all the important squares. Bishop b5 is good, so it's not really nice that the knight is pinned. Pawn f6 hangs. Pawn e4 hangs too. So white is better. That's why black plays bishop g7. D takes e5. c4 is possible, but then black develops himself with bishop g4. C takes d5. Queen takes d5. D takes e5 and long castle. And I think that here black has very good compensation. Bishop takes c6. Queen takes c6. Bishop e3. Queen e4, rook c1, bishop takes f3, and after all the position is about equality. Another alternative to taking on e5 is the short castle. Short castle, d takes e5 now, but then black can take with a knight. And the problem here is that if white plays knight d4, then black plays c5 immediately, and knight cannot go to f5. So the knight has to go back, and then actually now white is in big troubles because of move a6. And then c4 or b5. So this doesn't work at all. Okay, so let's see what happens in the main line. This is the most unpleasant continuation. D takes e5. Short castle. F takes e5 is not so good because of simply knight takes e5, and it seems like white is better here. So short castle. Now taking on f6 is not good because of rook e8, and here black has terrific compensation. So white should play e6. Another possibility is to take on c6 first and play e6 in the next move. So bishop takes c6, b takes c6, and e6 now. But then rook e8. Since white already gave up the white squared bishop, obviously black will always have compensation because the position is open, the center is open, and two bishops will serve as a good basis for the compensation of black. So, for example, bishop e3. Bishop takes e6. Long castle, queen d6. Knight d4, just as one possibility. Here black can play bishop d7 if he wants to, but also c5 seems pretty strong. Queen takes e6, and now there is no defense against d4. Queen h5, for example, d4, and then queen takes a2. I think black has at least good compensation. So giving up the white squared bishop is not a good idea for white. He should play e6 immediately. And now somehow black needs to get the pawn back, but at the same time, like playing rook e8 seems too direct. So here at least in some cases white has such moves like knight d4. Well, now knight d4 doesn't work, but bishop takes c6, beats c6, knight d4 then. So instead of attacking the pawn immediately, black plays knight e5. This is the strongest move. The idea here is that he makes it possible for the c pawn to move forwards if it need be. And an additional idea is to play a6 and somehow to force the bishop to go to d3, and so that black can take the bishop then, get white squared bishop. So let's see what options does white have. Short castle. This is the first one, and the main one. Bishop f4 is the alternative. But then black goes with c6, bishop d3, knight takes d3, queen takes d3, bishop takes e6, and again, because of the white squared bishop, black has pretty nice compensation. For example, short castle, queen d7, knight h4, bishop f7. The point of going to f7 is that after knight f5, black has bishop g6. So bishop e6, after bishop f7, h3, rook fe8. Black wanted to play queen g4, that's why h3, rook e8, and after all, this position is about equality. The bishop on g7 looks bad, but actually the bishop on f4 is not much better because both of them don't do anything. If long castle instead of short castle, then black can play bishop g4, rook d e1, queen a5, a3, rook a to e8, and well, black wants to take on f3 and on e1, so bishop d2, queen b6 or queen c7, and it looks like black is fine again. The small weakness on the king side doesn't matter so much because all the black pieces are close to the king, and it is very difficult for white to create a dangerous attack. Especially remember that when the center is open, it's extremely difficult to create attack against king on the king side or on the queen side, doesn't matter. Because many pieces are subject to be exchanged. So, on another side, sacrificing the piece, knight takes e5, f takes e5, bishop takes e5 is not so good too. C takes b5, bishop takes g7, king takes g7, e7, but queen a5. This is the point. c3 and rook e8. Queen goes to e5, king goes to f7, and white has nothing better but perpetual check. He cannot play for win, of course. Alright, so this is 11th bishop f4. Instead of bishop f4, white can play knight d4. But then there is a problem. Black plays c6, bishop d3, black goes with c5, knight f5, and black takes on e6. Knight takes g7, king takes g7 with idea c4, and if white plays like c3, black can play bishop g4, f3, knight takes d3, queen takes d3, rook e8, king f2, bishop h5 with idea bishop g6, and I think that the position is about equality. Black should not have problems here. So 11th knight d4 does not promise an advantage either. So white plays short castle, bishop takes e6, knight to d4 now. Now it makes more sense because the bishop on e6 hangs. Bishop g4, f3, and very strong move, bishop c8. The bishop simply goes back, and we don't want to exchange the white squared bishops because then the square f5 will really become weak. What we want is to exchange the white squared bishop of white against our knight. So we want to play c6, c5, create some active play in the center. And the bishop from c8 controls the square f5. f4, c6. F takes e5, f takes e5. Very good move. So now both the knight d4 and bishop b5 hang. Rook takes f8. Queen takes f8. Knight takes c6. B takes c6, bishop takes c6 doesn't work because of queen c5 check, and black wins. So white goes back, and now the easiest for black is to play e4. The problem with taking on d4 is the move bishop, queen h5, h6, and bishop d2. And it looks like the position of white is simply won, because rook f1, queen g6 are very dangerous threats. So e4, bishop takes e4, bishop takes d4, bishop e3, bishop takes e3, queen takes e3, d takes e4, queen g5, and perpetual check after queen g7, queen d8. Black cannot play king h8 because of queen e5. I mean, it is again perpetual check. Actually, don't play king h8 because of rook f1. And the attack becomes very dangerous. So, this is everything about taking on f6 and playing, about queen e2 and taking on f6. So remember the idea of sacrificing the pawn at the beginning and then the move knight e5 so that you can move your c pawn and you play against the bishop b5. And now we come to the most unpleasant line in knight f6 variation, namely taking on f6 immediately. Queen takes f6. So playing in this position g takes f6 is very dangerous because of knight h4. And queen h5 is very unpleasant threat. So queen takes f6. And white plays queen e2. And here black gets in small troubles, but he can solve them. And the way he has to solve them is to give up the pawn e5. He plays bishop e7. Moves like d6 are not good because of d4. That makes things even worse. Bishop e7, bishop takes c6, and now there are two possibilities. In an important game, I think Rajavov played took on c6 with d pawn. He did it against Vladimir Kramnik, and he could keep draw in the position after knight takes e5, bishop f5, d4, short castle, bishop d6, c3, rook e8, f4, and bishop e6. And it turned out that it is extremely difficult to win this position despite the extra pawn, because all the white squares in the position of white are weak. The white squared bishop serves as a compensation. And, well, later black can play a5. Whatever white does, black will always have compensation based on the white squared bishop. And the game ended draw. The problem of this position is that black cannot play actively for an advantage or for any kind of compensation. So here you simply have to stay and wait. But if you analyze this position a little bit with computer and try to play it in rapid games or blitz games and get some experience here, then you will see that it's not too difficult to maintain the equality here. But I think this position is playable and you can try it in your own practice. But let me show you the alternative way to play, which is also sacrificing a pawn, but in a slightly different way. So bishop takes c6, b takes c6. Now, if white takes on e5 with a queen, black plays d6, queen takes f6, bishop takes f6, d3. After d4, bishop g4, bishop e3, rook b8, b3. Somehow black can probably even take on f3, g takes f3 and play king f7. With idea king e6 and king f5. And despite the extra pawn, I don't think that white can break through. And the difference here is that black also has some counterplay. He can put the rook on b5 and try to play with rook h5, rook f5 against the weak pawns of white. It's always, by the way, a good idea, remember this, to play a6 in this position, to put the pawn on a white square. Can never be wrong, so that white never has d5. So, after d3, this is kind of similar game. Black plays short castle, rook b1 to allow the bishop to leave from c1, bishop g4, bishop p3, rook a b8. White can play b3, but then black plays c5 or bishop takes f3, bishop c3 check. Well, yeah, actually after b3, bishop takes f3 seems really strong. King e2 and c5 now blocking everything. And then white will play rook f5, rook f8. Black will play rook f5, rook f8. So instead of this, white can play king d2, bishop takes f3, g takes f3, bishop takes b2, bishop takes a7, rook a8, rook takes b2, rook takes a7, pawn f3 hangs. And the problem is that white cannot protect it efficiently. If he plays king e2, rook e8, king f1, black has rook a8, winning the a2 pawn. So after check, white has to go back, and then rook goes back to f8 with the idea to take on f3. And if white decides to play with rook a1, then rook takes f3, king e2, and at least black can play rook f5, and after a4, rook a5. And this is a position where black cannot lose, because he will simply bring his king to d7 soon, so that the king is close to the pawn a4, and then play with the rook on the 5th row with rook h5, rook f5. So, this is about this endgame after queen takes e5. So I think it is about equality. I think that white doesn't have a serious advantage. So here we are, queen e2, bishop e7, bishop takes c6, b takes c6. Now let's see two other moves. If white plays d4, black goes with queen g6, short castle d6, bishop h3 is a threat, queen c4, now d5, queen c3, takes d4, knight takes d4, c5. Obviously, the position of black is fine. White doesn't have anything serious. And finally, the last possibility for white is to take on e5 with a knight. After b takes c6, knight takes e5. Black can play both moves. He can castle short castle on queen e6, rook e1, bishop c5, knight f3, queen takes e2, rook takes e2, d6. Now bishop g4 is a very unpleasant threat. After d4, bishop b6. Still, black has very strong compensation. Rook e7, bishop g4, bishop e3 is one possibility to play, but then bishop takes f3, g takes f3, and at least rook f7 with good position for black. But it might be even stronger to play queen e6 immediately, not to allow white to castle short. White plays d4. Black plays short castle. Knight d3, queen f7, short castle, bishop f6, bishop e3, bishop a6, and after queen d2, rook a b8. So here black has a very dynamic game. White has an extra pawn, but certainly black has compensation because of two bishops and because of the activity of his pieces. And this is actually everything about this variation with knight f6. So as you have seen, these two lines, knight f6 and d5, they differ by a whole amount. d5 is a more solid line, but it doesn't give black much chances to play dynamically, to play for an advantage. Rather, the positions are static, and if white doesn't make a terrible mistake, then black will be able to equalize, but not more. And here the variation with knight f6 provides black with some active possibilities. So it depends on what kind of a player you are. If you like active play, knight f6 may be a better option for you. If you like to play solid, then you should go with fifth d5. Well, yeah, so we are done now with the variation knight c3, and what we will cover next is the variations that became popular in the last period, namely fourth move g3. Okay, I hope you liked this section, and I will see you in the next one.